Hello from Tel Aviv, Israel, everybody. I'm TGS Sa'ar from TGS Israel. Welcome to this presentation, and we start. First, the outline. This presentation of various groups of people who've already decided or to start a business in Israel because they want it, because they need it. People already are in and want to know some other things, because not everything in Israel is like in Europe or in the States or in the Far East. I will go there to the steps of the practical steps. I will talk a little bit about the visa for foreign employees, and then we go to some initial steps that people who are interested or maybe will be interested in the future to look in Israel from what I call bird's view. We speak about the economy, demographics, culture, mentality, geography, and then we go back to taxation highlights. We will also tell you about I would say, tax relations between Israel and other countries, as well as for the social security agreements. I will speak a little bit about the tax benefits and potential grants. And for dessert, we will speak about special group of people who are eligible for 10 years tax holiday on their international business. They run from outside from Israel, but this is a specific group. So let's start. These are the practical steps. Once you've decided to set up a business in Israel, these are the steps. You need to decide whether or not you be a branch or a subsidiary, and then you go to set up your legal entity with the Israeli company register, the VAT registration, and then corporate income tax registration. And if you employ people, the employer's file. First, I think most foreign entities that are doing business in Israel prefer to run the branch for tax reasons, because they will pay in Israel only 23% corporate income tax, and there's no additional branch tax when we're withdrawing the earnings from Israel. However, you may have some other reasons you want to set a subsidiary. Maybe it's legal reasons, or the tender, for example, you want to attend, requires you to have a local corporation. Usually it will be with a local partner. To set up a company in Israel is very simple. It takes a few days. However, if you are a branch, you would need to go several formalities to translate your bylaws. There are enough lawyers in Israel who will be able to support you with this. And this will not take too much time, whether you're a branch. If you're a branch, you're registered as a foreign company in Israel. You will get a number from the Israeli company registrar. And if you're a local company, you'll get a local number. Now we are getting to the most problematic stage, opening the bank account in Israel. I don't think it's unique for Israel, but I know what's going on in Israel. Once you overcome this stage, you can say you overcome 70–80% of the stages that I mentioned previously. There are not very many banks in Israel. There are two major banks, Bank of Oalim and Leumi Bank. There are another three banks, and there are some small banks. I must tell you that, for example, Citibank have a branch in Israel, but not everyone can knock on the door and come, I want to open an account with Citibank in Israel. The banks are not that keen to open bank accounts for foreign entities. Everybody is afraid from the FATCA, from the CRS, and the anti-money laundering. So they want to know exactly who is the ultimate beneficial owner. I assume that everybody worldwide is aware of these things. Therefore, I suggest that before you start your business in Israel, contact the local bank to see that they will open for you a bank account. It came to a stage that in Israel, the banks have special branches where they deal with foreign entities. It can be a local company where the shareholders are foreign people, they will also go to these branches of our banks. Moreover, the banks are very much aware of the GDPR that is in Europe, and they are not that keen to hold information about EU people within their database, but you can overcome it. So we are now, after 70–80% of the procedure, now it's formalities that any accountant will be able to support you. VAT registration, you will not be able to open a bank account, VAT file, unless you have a bank account in Israel. So you open a VAT registration, you register for VAT. If you are a foreign entity or the shareholders are foreigners, you need to have a local Israel representative. Basically, this is the guy that if there are any problem, they will, I would say, they will blame him. So you need to get a local guy. It's not that simple. Usually they will ask for collateral and some basic control over the way you run your VAT matters in Israel. Registration for your opening of your corporate income tax file is very easy. And if you employ people in Israel, it's very easy to open employer's file. And as soon as you open your ITA is IRS or HMRC, and how they call it in France, I don't know. So it will automatically open you also the national security file. There are rare cases where foreign entities only do not have a permanent establishment in Israel. However, they employ local Israeli people. They are able to open only employer's file. How do we report to everybody? So in Israel, we report annual tax return. All companies or branches are required to have audited annual reports. This is not the situation in other countries. You can have a micro entity also needs to have audited annual reports. Now, in the event you also report on the tax withholding deducted from your employees, as well from other people, as well as national insurance withholding from your employees. On a monthly basis, you report to VAT, including VAT return. You don't have to wait too much. It will take up to 60 days to get your VAT returns. And hopefully you will earn money in Israel. Therefore, you will report on tax advances. Some other factors from our experience you should take into account. You need to use a local bookkeeping system. You will not be able to use your own local international system. However, you can we can use the index, the chart of account that people from France, from USA, from China are using. Usually it's possible to export Excel file, so you can CSV files, so you can import the transactions into your local bookkeeping system. Not like in Europe and other places, VAT is not a separate service. This is a part of the bookkeeping system. As in many countries, labor law and legislation is very, very extended in Israel. So don't rely on the labor law legislation you know from your home country. You need a good labor law lawyer who will support you with the agreements and all the other things you need to know when employing people in Israel. In Israel, not all people have to file annual tax return, and therefore all employees, most of them, do not file annual tax return. Therefore, the employer has to withhold and calculate and withhold all the tax withheld, national social security, pension funds, and more. Speaking about getting a B1 visa in order to work in Israel, so it's not different in compared to other countries. There are two main groups of foreign people who are working in Israel, those in the nursing industry, construction, agriculture, and there are what I call foreign experts. Foreign experts are people who are invited to work in Israel because they are skilled. They need to have a minimum salary of double of the average salary, and they need to be invited by a local entity. It can be your own branch. These foreign experts are divided into two groups, I would say. People who are expats, expatria, people, for example, are working for a German company or relocated to Israel for 1 to 5 years, maybe more, and people who were recruited by the local entity, whether it's a branch or a subsidiary, and are coming from other countries. They also can need such a visa. I will tell you later on some benefits for foreign experts. So here we are. Can you see us? It's not that simple. So Dominique Margot mentioned to me the diversity. So it's a very small ski resort operating maybe months or two. And you see many, many places, whether it's Tel Aviv, Sea of Galilee. Most of the country is basically a desert. So how big is Israel? Actually, I would say how small is Israel? The distance from the northern part or the southern part would be 430 kilometers. It's 170 miles. And the maximum weight is 100 kilometers, meaning this is the maximum. It can be even smaller. So what goes in this small country? So our capital is Jerusalem, Al-Quds. So this is our capital, where all the government offices are there. Some of them have also offices in Tel Aviv. And Jerusalem is there over thousands of years. I couldn't say when as it started. And not very far from there, if you're going down the mountain, 80 kilometers, only a little bit than 100 years ago started Tel Aviv, which is the economic capital of Israel. This picture is a lottery for plots for mention. People who were living in Jaffa and wanted to have some better quality of life, so they moved it some 2 kilometers to the north. Same place today. Same place 110 years ago. So this is the place. Metropolitan Tel Aviv is something around 4 million people. It's not that much if you compare it to large metropolitan worldwide, but you will see that it's a lot. Why? This is you can see the difference between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Feel the difference. Now let's speak a little bit about economy, demography. I will start speaking about the Gini index. For those who are not familiar with Gini index is the distribution of income among families. For example, if 10% of the families have 50% of the income, your Gini index will be very high. If this 10% of the population have only 25% of the income, your Gini index will be low. So where are we standing? You can see Belgium and Scandinavia, they're number 8, number 9 in the world, with Gini index around 25, 27. Going down, you can see, for example, the United States, you see, they are down, they are ranked 114 among the worldwide countries. Now, their index is 41, and here is Israel. So you can see their distribution, the income among families is not that good in Israel in compare, for example, to South Korea. This has, we'll come back to it in a few moments. So I mentioned already that 4 million people are living in the metropolitan Tel Aviv. Altogether, we are 9.5 million people. 74% of them are Jewish. 26% among them are Arabs, most of them Muslims. Among the 74% of Jewish people, 13% are ultra-Orthodox. Now, since you already have demonstrated the Gini index in Israel is high, you would expect there will be some poor population, which it is. This is the situation. The poor population is focused mainly among two parts of the population: the ultra-Orthodox and the Arabs. The reason are, I would say, culture and other reasons and demographics. But in this population, this is my personal view, there is a high potential to get educated and quality manpower. And among our natural resources, manpower is a good natural resources. Israel is what we call high-tech nation. So you see various people, a little bit of our cultural mentality. Well, I cannot judge, so I asked people. I had a meeting several weeks ago with a German guy who is expat working in Israel. I asked him about our cultural mentality. So he said, Israelis are very warm and open, but they say the way we negotiate is not European way, it's not American way, it's certainly not Chinese or Japanese way. We are very, very active when we negotiate. The fact we speak English doesn't mean we are Europeans or Americans. So you should know it. Some other things about focus, since you see diversity of people, for example, looking at the ultra-Orthodox population, you can see it. So if you meet them, you will not shake, if you're a man, you will not shake a hand with religious woman, especially if she's ultra-Orthodox, and the religious ultra-Orthodox man will not shake your hand if you're a woman. So don't be insulted. This is the culture. Just a minute, going back to the culture, they say that the Israeli, they say what they mean, and they certainly mean what they say. If you speak with people from other places, they don't say everything. It would not be polite. So if they meet with an Israeli and he tells it, they're a little bit confused. Don't be confused. This is the culture. So where are we standing in terms of GDP? So if, for example, if in the United States, their GDP is 21 trillion, and I believe this is Germany, 3.8 trillion a year. So we are something around 10% of Germany. So it's very nice if you compare it to the size, the geographical size of Israel and the population. Now the GDP per capita, this is not the exact amount because it's what we call the purchasing power parity. So we are 37 in the world, 40K US dollar a year. The GDP, you can see Norway, you can see USA, you can see Greece and China. So it will show you where are we. Of course, if we look only on the population who are working, the high tech and other industries, of course, it will be higher. Our economy. So the government, like in some other places, has significant share in, of course, in the private sector. For example, we have Israeli air industry, which is not only air, it's also space, it's also defense, owned by the government. But there are still major industry sectors. We are privately owned. Many of them are registered in NASDAQ, in New York Stock Exchange. We're speaking about tourism, defense industry, metalworks, chemicals, medical equipment, and diamond industry, which used to be years ago much more big than compared to these days, but still it's a big diamond trade center in Israel. We are very poor with natural resources. Therefore, there's a lot of import into Israel, whether it's raw materials, food, and coal. But we are lucky also to have a lot of export from Israel, so it's balanced. One implication is everything that has to do with logistics is very, very much developed in Israel. But beginning of the 21st century, there were a lot of large natural gas reserves, which is a very developed. Hello, Alina, which is a very much developed industry. The whole area of the eastern side of the Mediterranean is probably packed with gas reserves. Therefore, a lot of international companies are coming in because they're interested in the gas. In the last 10, 15 years, there has been massive investment in transportation infrastructure. This, of course, opened the door for international entities to run business in Israel, whether it's people from Spain, the United States, from Europe, from Germany. The Chinese came in. They all are very highly operating in Israel. I can tell you that we also give some services to some companies who are running business in Israel. The average wage in Israel, salary, monthly. So I told you the average is not telling you much. It's something around 12K per month, which 12K Israeli shekel. In dollars, approximately $3,500. But if you look, for example, the average in the high-tech sector, of course, it's 8K US dollars. This is the average. In the high-tech, you can reach much higher salaries. This, of course, reflects this other reflection of the Gini index that I demonstrated for you previously. If you employ people in Israel, you should take into account around 30% overhead employers part, which is the social security, pension funds, and more. Coming back to taxation. The corporate income tax in Israel is 23%. This is a stable rate for already many years. This will work also for branches. However, there are certain sectors where enterprise in special sectors in geographical areas who are eligible for a lower corporate income tax, 7.5%, 60%. If you open let's say Intel, it's a worldwide company. For many years, they're running in some area, not in the center in Israel, a very large company. They will pay even more, less than 7.5% tax. And there's also reduced rates on dividends distributed from a local Israeli company, not from a branch. And you can get some grants. R&D support, don't go for it. Well, in the taxation in Israel for individual is high. It can reach very quickly to 50%. Whether you're employee or self-employed, and you have business activities, 0% up to 50%. A local Israeli company will distribute dividends to its local shareholders. The dividends will be 25 to 28 if you're a small shareholder, 30 to 33% if you're a main shareholder. Capital gains are 25% mainly, but there are a lot of other rates depending on various matters. We will not go into it. Tax treaties. We do have tax treaties with major countries, but Israel also has signed the MLI, the multilateral instrument. This agreement between many countries was signed in order to implement the BEPS initiative. The BEPS is the base erosion and profit shifting. All these multinational companies who were not paying tax in places like Ireland and Singapore. So there's the BEPS. Coming back to the lower tax rates I mentioned for in this part, you see the 7.5% and 60%. I know that there is a minimum tax rate under the MLI. I believe it works for companies having more than $100 million or euros annual turnover. One more thing you should take into account when you employ foreign people in Israel is the bilateral social security agreement. We do have it with many countries, but USA is excluded. So there are many Israelis who live in Israel, Jewish people who are, we have also a USA passport, and they need to file annual tax return in the United States. There's special tax planning to avoid double social security payments. I spoke about some tax benefits. I didn't mention in this slide the expats. The foreign experts coming to Israel to work. It can start with someone who's coming to work for Tel Aviv University, or some cook who's working in Israel for a prestigious French or Thai restaurant. In the first year when they're staying in Israel, they have some tax benefits. They have per diem tax-free amount only in the first 12 months, and also they can they're eligible that the rent that they're getting they're reimbursed by the employer for the rent. It's also for the first 12 months it's tax-free. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, there is a special group of people who have 10 years tax holiday in Israel for their worldwide income. Who are they? They're individuals who became first-time tax resident in Israel. Usually there are people who are what we're calling they immigrate to Israel, and people who live over 10, 11 years. They are Israelis, but they'll stay a long period of time outside in Israel, and they are coming back to Israel. And there are some other very small cases which I will not mention. Now, how can you do it? It's a beautiful tax heaven. You come to Israel and you live your business, whether it's in Paris, whether it's in New York, whether it's in Cayman Islands, whether it's in Tobago. So you don't have, and you don't run it, you don't control and manage it from Israel. So if you were a normal Israeli, you would have to report on it. But here for 10 years, not only you don't have to pay tax on it, you don't have to report on it. So you decided to run your worldwide business from some other places where the taxation is not that significant, and you need to open a bank account. So you knock on the door of, let's say, UBS or UBP or Credit Suisse, and you say, okay, please tell us, where are you tax resident? If you stay a year in Israel, you may get a confirmation from our tax authorities you're Israeli tax resident. So these people are doing it. Recently, many people coming from Russia and Ukraine to Israel, wealthy people, and they take advantage of it. So keep it in mind. If you have friends or you have clients, you should know about it. Thank you. Here we are. The nice guy is my partner, Ronen. This is myself, you know already. Questions?
I just have one question. If you had one thing to say to someone who wants to do business in Israel, what would you say to this person?
I would say not one thing, I would say two things. First, okay, decide on your business, assuming there is no tax in the world. Look if it's a good business. Okay? And second, soon as you made your homework, recently Carrefour has decided to come to Israel. It took them a long time to decide whether or not to make business in Israel. Once you have decided, come and consult with a local expert.
Elisha, I have maybe one more question.
Yes.
Thank you again for very, very good presentation. It was very detailed and very inspirational. Perhaps one question related to the latest news and latest political things that are happening. Yeah, have you seen or did it have a big impact on your business? Yeah, what's happening in Ukraine? Like, have you seen a big increase in your clients?
Okay, if you're speaking about our business as accountants, auditors, that's one thing. And if you're speaking about the whole economy, it's other thing. For us, I must say there are people coming from, as I mentioned, from Ukraine and from Russia. They need services in Israel. The point they come first to our tax department, since we also speak Russian in our firm. North-Ukrainian also speak Russian, so we are able to support them. But this is not a major part for us, for our business. It did influence the entire economy, but this is the same thing all over. Israel has, not like other countries, there are direct daily flights from Tel Aviv to Moscow with our El Al national company. Actually, I visited Moscow 2 months ago. You can feel in Moscow the situation. And there's a problem with import and export from Russia. The flight takes 2 hours more. Sea transportation is limited. People are importing goods from Russia to Israel, and then they move the containers to another ship. They have to clear it from the custom clearance, because otherwise it will be, let's say, if you export it to Canada, so they need to see it was exported from Israel. The people are doing business with it. I believe also in the Emirates, they also have some similar business, because there are flights coming from Russia to the Emirates, and then I'm speaking about air traffic. So in this way, it did influence our business. Our personal business at TGS, I don't see any major, any significant influence.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elisha.
Okay. So are we through? We stop everything?
Thank you very much, Elisha. That was a very, very interesting presentation. Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I hope it was practical.
Very useful.
Yeah.
Okay. So bye-bye, everybody.